I think sometimes that we segregate the monetary benefits of whatever we're doing from the emotional. I am of the belief that if you are unfulfilled in your line of work, it is a net loss regardless of what kind of revenue or income you generate.
Welcome back to It's Never About Money, the podcast where we explore the often thorny relationship between pursuing your passions and, well, making ends meet. Today's guest is someone who embodies this idea in a way that might make your head spin, but in a good way. Of course, Daron Roberts has gone from Harvard Law to becoming a former NFL coach to leading the Center for Sports Leadership and Innovation at the University of Texas, all while chasing his 5 children running through the streets of Austin, Texas. Daron was named top 20 global speaker in 2024, and Daron is the author of 3 books: Microwins, a kid's book about empathy, and Call an Audible. I recently attended a conference where Daron spoke, and I just felt this sort of overwhelming compulsion to ask him to come on, as his life experience really exemplifies the idea of choosing meaning over money. Like Daron says, the answer is no until you ask. So I asked. In this episode, I don't believe we are going to be advocating for a life of poverty to achieve our purpose, but I am hoping we can discuss where money and meaning live in harmony. I'm really honored to have you on, Daron, to our Niche Aussie podcast. Welcome.
Joe, it's great to be on, man. Looking forward to the conversation, and this is going to be a good time.
Awesome. All right. Well, for our Australian community, we do have international guests, of course. We have some US followers and so on, but for our Australian community who don't know necessarily maybe a bit about NFL, but also, your career journey, tell us a little bit about your career and the balance between that career and family.
Thanks, Joe. It's good to be on. It's never about money. You're very convincing. I usually don't do podcasts. I had a podcast for 175 episodes. And after my last episode, I said, I am never going to do another podcast again. So I don't miss them, but it's going to be good to have a conversation. I do maybe 2 or 3 a year. So you're very convincing. Right. I'm glad to be on. I'm from Texas. My mom and dad were, my dad was a pastor. My mom was a teacher, grew up wanting to go into government, be the governor of the state of Texas, where I grew up. Played football in high school, wasn't that good. Didn't play in college. Went to the University of Texas. The plan was to be governor by 40. Harvard Law School was the main destination on that roadmap. Mm-hmm. I applied and got waitlisted. And so that was one of the first real roadblocks, detours that I'd met as a young man. I wouldn't say that life was easy for me before that, but that was one of those stretch goals that I knew instantly would require me to kind of keep coming back to this well of resilience. I took a job in the meantime with a United States senator, went to DC, was there for 9/11. So just learned more than I could ever really imagine about crisis management, governance, public policy. Was reapplying to Harvard Law School, got waitlisted 4 times, finally got in, started law school in 2004. And I was kind of just doing what law school students do, study, clerking for firms in the summers. And then the summer before my last year of law school, a good buddy of mine from high school called me up and said, hey, I've got to work a football camp. So he was a football coach. I went with him to the camp. I volunteered and just loved it. And it was the first time in my life that I didn't have to set my alarm clock to get up. So I went back to Cambridge for my last year. I called my parents and I said, "Look, I'm going to be a football coach." And they were surprised to say, put it mildly, but very supportive. And while I was in my last year, I wrote a letter to all 32 clubs in the National Football League. Received 31 rejections. The Kansas City Chiefs, led by Coach Herm Edwards, called and said yes. So I graduated from law school and went straight to Kansas City, Missouri, and I was just the grunt. I was the bottom of the totem pole, picking up people from the airport, cleaning whiteboards, holding, dummies at practice, moving cones around, just whatever they needed. But it was also, I liken that period of my life to getting a PhD in American football because there are only 32 clubs. There are limited number of opportunities for people to work in those organizations. So I was very keen to the fact that this was a rare chance for me to get an inside look at what coaching was.
This is super interesting. This idea that you kind of survey the landscape, you see, and you've had a very limited experience in coaching, but you saw, and it seems like you saw enough to feel super passionate about changing things because you had a career kind of laid out before you, and then you've gone, okay, no, I'm going to go and try something else. How do you have a passion for something you've never even tried? It's like, like how does that work? Because it's a pretty significant fork in the road.
Yeah, I would say, I think we have to remember, and I think what happens, I have 5 kids, so I get to see this on a daily basis. A first exposure to something is a really good litmus test. And I think as adults, what happens is we get into these grooves, we take jobs, we're in the office and we start paying bills and mortgages. And you forget that for the first, 15, 18 years of your life, everything was new. And I think that a lot of adults get into a rut because we start to think, one, it's too late for me to make a change. Two, the switching costs are so high that for me to switch careers or to move across the country or the globe to pick up a new craft, like those switching costs are so high that I might as well just continue with the status quo. And I'm not by any means making this seem like an easy change, but I just know too many adults who are very dissatisfied with where they are, but
So
they're
is it this?
resigned to do that. Yeah.
So it's maybe what, Daron, correct me if I'm wrong, but like the switching cost that is not taken into account, or maybe ignored or pushed deep down in us, is the switching cost, emotional sort of the turmoil of doing something perhaps that you're not feeling passionate about, or you're perhaps stuck doing something financially because it's financially effective for your family and it's kind of a certainty.
Yeah. I think it's both,
Yeah.
right? I think it's all those switching costs. It's emotional, it's monetary,
Yep.
because you've been doing this thing, and there's also a social cost, right? People know you for this thing that you do. You are a financial advisor. You are a lawyer. You are a CPA, and so the marketplace and your sort of body of networks or body of contacts, they know you as this thing. And I think sometimes we start to think like, oh, well, since everyone knows that I do X, it would confuse them if I do Y. And I think that I've never really given much of a damn about what they think. I'm the one thing that I know, Joe, is that like I'm the only person who's going to be there when I die. Like I know that for sure. Like, hey, look, I'll have family members around, but I know that I'm going to be the one that's going to have to live with the balance of my life. And so I think something else I want to touch on the switching costs. I also think that they're just from a psychological standpoint, we humans tend to overstate the negative cost. So, hey, my thought was if I go into Kansas City and I hate coaching, I've got a law degree from Harvard. Like no one's gonna the legal industry isn't going to come to a grinding halt. I could always go back and practice law. What I knew though from my summers of working in law firms was that it was just okay. I never left a law firm and thought to myself, damn, that was the best time of my life. I can't wait to practice law in a couple of years. And when I had that feeling from coaching, I just decided to make a move on it.
How did you create immunity from, like, it's one thing to have a sensitivity to switching costs as an individual human, but when you have many different people that care about you in your family that are also have that sensitivity to your own switching costs, and then impose their views and beliefs on that. How do you have the strength to be able to make choices that seem crazy to them, but are in line with your passions and your wants? That's a big one, I
Yeah.
think.
No, I think the first step is to really differentiate between people in your circle and people in your corner. So we tend to inflate the impact of people that frankly don't really care. Like, look, there are people in your circle who want you to be successful.
Sure.
If you're not, if you become a chef or work at Starbucks or practice law, it's not going to change their life. They may nod in approval, but I'm always really keen on knowing that, you know what, like I have a wife and 5 kids, I've got incredible parents. Those folks are the most invested in my success. They also are the most invested in my happiness. So my wife understands that regardless of the balance sheet, if I'm not personally fulfilled, it's a net loss, right?
Mm.
So I think sometimes that we segregate the monetary benefits of whatever we're doing from the emotional. I am of the belief that if you are unfulfilled in your line of work, it is a net loss, regardless of what kind of revenue or income you generate.
I completely agree. I love this idea, the distinction between someone in your corner and in your circle. I've really thought about that a lot, about people in your in your life. You have family, but not all family, as an example, is invested in what it is that is best for you. Maybe even they feel something that is best for you, but they're not actually seeing you wholly, and so they might be in your circle, but they're not in your corner. Is that what you were sort of
Yeah, I mean, look,
suggesting?
yeah, because I think at the core, the one litmus test for determining who are the people in your corner versus the circle is simply what do they care about? What does this person care about? Are they more concerned with my happiness, fulfillment, or my quote unquote success? Whatever measure, titles, income brackets, you name it. And the people that are in my corner, I mean, sure, they don't want me to be, you know, on the streets living in poverty, but they know that if I'm emotionally fulfilled, um, they would rather me live that existence than one of opulence and extreme wealth, but very unhappy. And look, I went to the best law school on the planet, and I have 549 classmates. And I can tell you that from my last reunion,
Mm.
one episode after the other was a conversation with people that are unhappy with what they do,
Mm.
but the same people who are extremely successful by external measures,
Mm.
partners at firms,
Mm.
judges, you name it.
Yeah.
So I've tried to. I think sometimes we segregate, the emotional from the monetary. I see them all as coexisting, and I'm always keen to not give the balance sheet too much credit. What I'll also say is that I also have a sneaky suspicion that if you are emotionally fulfilled in your craft,
Mm.
the marketplace can't help but to reward you economically. And I
Completely.
think that we're living in an age, you
Mm.
know, we're living in a time where it's never been easier to monetize your passion. I don't,
Absolutely.
yeah, I don't care what it is. Like I've got a
Mm.
great friend of mine. She loves composting. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
She had this Instagram page where she showed different urban composting techniques. This was before the pandemic. She had a few hits there. A couple of folks liked her stuff. The pandemic hits, and then all of these people who are stuck are trying to figure out things to do to keep them busy. And because she had built this track record of being like a composting expert, she was selling courses and she was, getting coaching clients who wanted help with it. And she's built an incredible business, which by a lot of external measures would have seemed absolutely crazy to most of the people around her.
Mm.
But the marketplace, I think people are really and some of this is subconscious, people know when you are really working within your purpose. Like you've met some people and you're like, you know what? She's doing what she was meant to do. And I don't mean that there's like this. I don't really even believe in like this solitary purpose that we're born
No,
with.
no,
But I
no.
think you feel
Mm,
it when it
mm,
hits. So
I agree.
I have to
Yeah,
give it stuff
I
credit.
just thinking like this is, we've taken some things for granted. The idea that values just are clear and people we can articulate our values to others. Like it's incumbent upon us to be able to articulate to others what our values are and to understand what our values are, so that they can actually either be in our corner or just be in our circle. They can decide, right? So if we're not
Right.
very clear ourselves, it's like how do they know whether they're going to be in our corner or not, right? So you talk about value alignment and you talk about journaling, and I wonder whether the two actually sit hand in hand.
Yeah, for me, I'm constantly trying to spend as much solitary time with myself,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm trying to continuously learn more and more about Darren. And I think that, I have a bias for introspection because I just believe that I constantly need to check in with Darren to see how Darren feels about what Darren is doing. That's journaling, that's meditation, um, that's seeing a therapist, that's having a life coach. Like I will, I will not spare an expense when it comes to my emotional well-being.
Mm.
And I think that not to say, I don't believe that by any stretch of the imagination, um, I'm completely like I'm a work in progress. We'll put it that way. But I do think that my internal sensors for why and how I should work are very in tune with uh, with my inner person, and that's taken a lot of work, and a part of that has been journaling.
Mm, mm. It's a constant reflecting back, sorting out your thoughts, looking at
Yeah,
decisions that you've
sometimes I
made
want
in
to.
the past and what choices you've made, right? Like,
Yeah, Joe. And another point that you made me think of is that the great thing about journaling is that it oftentimes is a great reminder of how incorrect our past assumptions were.
mm,
Relationships that we thought we needed,
mhm,
um, promotions, cities that we thought would be incredible. Like
mm,
we kind of we a lot of life is just guessing. We think like, oh, this next move, this next person is gonna be the thing that's gonna make me happy. And when
mm,
you write about it and then revisit it 10 years later, and you say, I was wrong. like so, it also I think it also is a great. It reminds me not to take myself too seriously and also to not give my predictive capabilities too much credit.
mm.
Yeah.
We also have these wild narratives that run through our brains that just make are nonsensical, and often we just confuse with them, right? But when you write something down on a piece of paper, I mean, you look at it and you're just like, that is a wild statement to make. There are so many ways that I could dispel that incredibly cynical or negative, belief sort of system that I carry. So I just think it's just a remarkable tool.
Yeah. No, I am, look, and nobody does it. I'm constantly looking for good reasons to stay away from my phone. And I think that the more tactile I become, the more distance I create between me and my cell phone, um, the better I am as a human.
So it took 32 letters to get to the Kansas City Chiefs. I interrupted your flow
Yes.
state and we went on a little bit of a deep dive, which was excellent. Let's
Yeah.
go back to that. Like, what's happening in that at that period of time. You're into the NFL now. You've made some choices of passion, and your family's on board. But of course, there are always questions because this is not a usual path. Like,
Yeah.
what's going on?
I'm learning. I'm having a great time. I'm
Right?
tired. I'm not sleeping much.
Yeah.
I'm waking up at 4:30. I'm going to bed at midnight.
Mm-hmm.
I'm tired. I'm underfed, and I'm having the best time of my life. and I am learning. You know, it's hard to describe the level of detail and minutia that goes into running a National Football League organization. I mean, from player evaluations to constructing game plans to analyzing the physical movements of your players. I mean,
Mm,
it is an all encompassing affair.
mm,
And
mhm,
so I was drinking out of a fire hose and loving it. And I decided to let myself do that. Like, I didn't want to feel guilty because my friends were practicing law at, insert law firm here. I loved it and really just leaned into it.
mhm. And how was how was the sort of tension between at that stage? I think that must be a phase of time, but how was the tension between family and work and the sort of obsession that you had?
Yeah, I mean, look, my parents were always supportive, and also I was 27, so like they weren't paying for any of my bills. So you know, if they were on board, great. If they weren't on board, that was cool too with me. But it wasn't like I was 18 and kind of running away from home. So I was really comfortable with my decision, and I also wasn't married when I made this decision. So like
Yeah.
it was
Okay.
literally me in a car.
Hmm. Hmm.
Now I
Hmm.
also, my wife. I think this is important. Um, I knew that the person that I was going to be compatible with in the future would also understand that I have this tendency to make pivots, and
Mm,
so I was also keen, like that was going to be an important characteristic. But at the
mm,
time, it was just myself, and
mm.
and I was having a great time, man. I was just
I,
I was living for me.
I love these ideas that you have about tendency patterns or tendency journals that you kind of put together. I can't remember exact term, but
Yeah.
do you think that like I'm imagining that you're doing that so that you can, improve your assessment of the team. You can sort of as a competitor analysis, all those things. But do you think there are tendencies that are more ingrained that just cannot really difficult to be changed? They're like the earliest algorithms, and then there's tendencies at the surface that can be changed. And what you're talking about with respect to finding your partner is talking to her about the really ingrained tendencies that would be difficult to actually amend and alter. And if your partner doesn't understand those or can't accommodate those, it would be a problem.
Yeah, I think here's the thing, right? I think every person really needs to understand, and I don't care if you're 8 or you're 80,
Hmm.
you need to understand what your personal non-negotiables are.
Mm,
And I know I am um, I am a disciple of the pivot. Doesn't mean that I'm looking to change something every week or
hmm.
year or decade.
Hmm.
It just means that if my belly is telling me that I would be more fulfilled doing something else, I am going to start charting an exit strategy from my current state to get to that place. And I think it's also why I think it's important from a relationship standpoint. Like, I need to be the clearest signal so people know. So this is not something I would, while I was dating, like I'm not trying to hide this. Like this is who I am.
Mm,
And so
mm,
if I'm going to be compatible with someone, like someone needs to be on board with that.
mm,
I think unfortunately what happens is that we tend to overlook the non-negotiables in the dating process. We
mhm,
tend to end up with the wrong people. Not anything's wrong with them. The compatibility isn't there. People may like each other. There may be some kind of love may be there or not, but you know, you haven't showed them your true self. You're still in a
mm,
dating mode. And then what
mhm,
happens is you get into a marriage mode and you start to look at each other and think, this isn't really quite what I signed up for, because neither one of you actually gave the other person a true look into who you were.
mm. And I suppose it's a starting point, being authentic with yourself and being honest with yourself about who you are, so that you feel confident enough to be able to show that and be vulnerable enough to
Mm,
show that to people that you want to be, I suppose.
absolutely. Yeah.
Mm. In terms of, again, this sort of idea of your resilience and the difference between sort of, the difference between resilience or and strategic persistence. Like you would have had a lot of knockbacks. You would have had some brutal conversations with others about your career, and you would have questioned your abilities. No doubt at times. How does one pursue their passion, cop the feedback that sometimes is very debilitating, and get back on their feet and move forward?
Yeah, I think you have to realize. So this is the way I see my craft. When it comes to my craft, and at the time it was coaching, I knew I had to subvert my ego. Number one, I was really honest with myself. I played high school football.
Mm.
I was now in the highest echelon of the sport of American football. I didn't know shit. Okay. So, like, my Harvard law degree carried absolutely no weight in an NFL locker room.
Mm-hmm.
I had to come to grips with that. That's a conversation that Daron had to have with Daron. Look, no one cares that you graduated from Harvard Law School. It's not going to help us win a football game.
Yeah.
When I get to that point, then I say to myself, hey, any feedback that I get from a coaching perspective, I'm going to make it highly impersonal. It's not going to be a coach tells me, hey, Daron, you need to do a better job of leading this footwork drill because the way that you're positioning their feet isn't going to help the cornerbacks get out of their breaks. That isn't an indictment on Daron the human. That's an indictment on Daron's ability to coach. And because I believe that this is a mutable trait, I can become a better coach. I'm going to accept the feedback, even though it may sting me personally. This is where I think most people fall into a very deep hole because they take feedback on their craft and turn it into a personal assault. And I'll say this, sometimes the giver of the feedback may not use the language or the tone that would allow a person to separate that which is purely specific to the craft and then that which is personal. And that's difficult because you can't control their delivery. And you can't control.
That's universal, Daron. That's universal. That's not just in.
That's not just coaching. I mean, that isn't. I mean, look.
Yeah.
I have some kids right now who are, I've got a kid who has a job, and we're going through the same thing. His first job. He's 14 years old. He gets some feedback, and it starts to become personal. And we're building. This is also, this is a muscle that you've got to work out. So you have to. We go through the steps of like breathing. Okay, breathe. Review the feedback that you wrote down. First of all, you need to write it down. Now, remove yourself from the conversation in the conference room or on the Zoom call. Now, read the feedback. Is this personal about you as a human being? No. This person's actually just trying to give me some advice on how to become a better insert craft here. If that's the case, let me breathe again and then ask myself, how can I incorporate this feedback into my way of living?
Is it helpful to have the step before that as well to sort of go, because there's a kind of thing where some people, you're Daron, the NFL coach, or like I'm an NFL head coach, or am I Daron, the person who loves and is working and is employed as an NFL head coach, right? So clearly distinguish and differentiate between actually helps you to be able to do exactly what you've just suggested.
Yeah. This is a tough one because oftentimes we allow the logos that we work for to subsume our own personality. So we become the NFL coach. I'm no longer Daron. I am Daron, the NFL coach. And this is where journaling helps me. Yeah. I constantly have to come back to the fact that, you know what, Daron, let's be honest. After you're dead, the NFL it's going to be here. Like, whether or not I'm alive or 30 or it doesn't matter. This game is going to continue without me. I better be at peace with Daron, the individual, before I over leverage myself into this logo. And I don't think a lot of people do that. And I think that it can really, you see people who can't cope with, look, I always tell people, you're one strategic meeting away from being fired. Let go. Like, so you better be at peace with you, because you can only control the controllables. And I think one of those controllables is how you view yourself as a human.
I really like this idea that you put out around the difference between um, thinking in Word versus thinking in Excel. In a
Yeah.
sense, I'm paraphrasing here, but I just absolutely loved it, because the idea that you have a dream in Word, right? And imagine you get feedback and it comes back in Microsoft Word, right? That kills that dream, right? Because it's all emotional and so on, right? But if you were able to take some of that feedback and pop it into Excel, you can start to like map it out in a more pragmatic and logical way. So could you maybe describe that idea?
Yeah.
Maybe I've kind of garbaged it. I'm sorry.
No. You're good. So I'll say this. I think you need both. So I think that,
Yeah.
and look, there may be a genetic precursor for this somewhere. I think we
Yeah.
tend to fall in one case or the other. So if we think about word to me is the liberal arts side of you. It's
Yep.
the imaginative, creative version of you. Excel is where the shit gets done, right? So
Mm,
this is the execution um, side of the ledger. I tend to skew to the word side. I love reading. I love writing. I'm constantly consuming fiction.
me too.
It is
Yeah, me too.
easy for me to stay in an imaginative state.
Mm,
Somewhere, and I don't know how this happened, somewhere I realized that unless I converted the dream state into concrete action items, nothing was going to change. So I had to shift my tendency to be an 80-20, Word to Excel person, to at least a 60-40, because I could never actualize the word side unless I spent significant time and effort on the Excel side.
mm, mm. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Hey, I wanted to change gears a little bit, because I think the thing that was really obvious to me was how integrated you are with your family, and
Mm,
particularly your dad. You mentioned, and in listening to your presentation that you gave not too long ago in the States, you mentioned your father and the conversations that you would have with
mm.
him around your career choices and so on. And I just thought it'd be nice for you to give some color to that and a few of the stories that come to mind.
Yeah, listen, I talk to my dad, almost every day. He's someone who, you talk about corner. I'll say this to people: it may be your dad, it may be your brother, it may be your first cousin, it may be your college roommate. When you
Mm,
find someone who is uniquely invested in your happiness, they're going to ride your stock, whether it's through the roof or in the cellar. When you find that person, spend as much time as possible with them. And my dad has always been really good at just zooming out and saying, okay, I hear what you're saying. Here are the variables that are at play. What's going to be your process for getting from A to B? And, my dad was like, hey, you're in a lot of debt. Like, what's the plan there? And I said, hey, um, the plan is I have 6 months before I have to repay these loans. I don't know of anyone who's been thrown in jail for being behind on student loan payments. That again, right? Even that assumption there, because a lot of people say, "Oh, I have to pay loans." Okay, I couldn't coach because I've got to pay my loans back. So let me go practice law. Well, that's kind of dumb, because I have a lot of confidence that says if I get a chance, I'm going to go make money as a coach, right? So, and he was just lockstep with me in terms of helping me strategize, and also was really good. Like I think look, you have micro and macro minded people. So there are some
mm.
people who will be, they tend to stay in the minutia of what did she say? Then what did you do there? Then you have some people who are really good at helping you kind of zoom out. And I'm glad that my dad has both qualities. Um, so like, for example, I'm moving into the world of fiction right now.
Yeah.
This has been a process over like I started a manuscript last October, so it's a year now. And my dad was just really curious about like, hey, so why? Right? I told him, he's like, oh, it's interesting. So what are you writing about? And he just checks in like, hey, how's the manuscript going? Tell me about one of your characters. Uh, how far along are you with the plot? And it's those kinds of questions where you're like, you know what? This person just cares about me being happy. Like in a very
Has
basic sense, they just care about me being happy.
has he evolved over time in the sense? I mean, everyone does, obviously, but like earlier days, I got the sense that there was a little bit more maybe rigidity in some of the discussions that you had with him because he was concerned about your choices as a very young man. And it feels like, correct me if I'm wrong, that the relationship has evolved in a very nice way in the sense that it seems like he's really collaborating with you and asking you questions and being your sounding board, almost like maybe mentor, a little bit more experienced sort of mentor, rather than I'm worried about my boy making bad decisions in his life. Has that shifted? I'm very curious
Yeah.
about that.
As a parent, I think this is what happens. It's really a function of the age curve. So, I'm really at a point where, my oldest is 14. I'm sure if he came to me at 21 and said, hey, instead of being a marine biologist, I want to be a painter. I
Mm.
would have some of the same probably thoughts, concerns as my dad did when I said I wanted to go into coaching. If he's telling me that he's 30, he's living his life. I mean, I've never, I've been fortunate. I've never had to ask my parents for any money
Hmm.
since I left college,
Hmm.
and I think they also understand that. Look, at the end of the day, I'm going to do what I have to do in order to make sure that the fixed cost of my life are taken care of. The insurance and the mortgage and the food and all of those things. I'm going to do whatever I need to do to make sure that that's taken care of. I'm going to do. And then after that, it's really just all about a function of what lights you up. So I do think with parents, it's understandable. When you're younger, they're more concerned that maybe you're not. I think just from a Maslow's perspective, right? They're like, are your basic needs going to be met? And I think at some point they're like, okay, this kid has the tools to feed himself.
Hmm.
So let me stop worrying about that so much and then spend more time on the happiness front.
I'll give you some context on this question because it's very relevant to me.
Yeah.
In my in my 30s, I feel like there was a lot of um, looking at the system that I'm governed by and rejecting some aspects of it. So, as an example, I'm part of a family, right?
Mm,
And a family has certain culture and certain values, but for some reason, at times that interferes with my own sort of differentiation, my own
mm,
individuality, right? And so there's kind of like this period of time where you're kind of juggling that. And you get into your 40s, and then all of a sudden, for some reason, which I'm very glad about, there's a movement towards how I'm part of a tribe, how I'm part of a culture. I went to Montreal recently, and my family's from an Egyptian heritage. And
mm,
to meet with my dad's side of the family, my dad has passed quite a while ago. Just to see my uncle and my aunties and to see the way they look, the way they talk, and the way they reminded me of my father, and
mm,
reminded me about the things that are about me that I can't help, and are kind of part of that tribe. It's kind of coming from
mm,
and stemming from that. And
mm,
the question really is, when I was researching a little bit more about you, you talk about your great great grandfather,
mm.
um, and the story about him and how that has been impactful. Um, how has it been impactful for you? What's important about that?
Mm.
Why does your tribe make any difference at all to you?
Yeah, for me, I think, listen, personal history, um, having an understanding of one's personal history is critical.
Hmm.
Not so that one will sort of copy paste. I know some people who are like, well, my parents are Christian and my
Hmm.
parents do this and they do that. And my parents, they invested in these kinds of things. And so that's what I'm going to do. I just think it's really good for me coming from, I'm a black man in America, so
Mm.
my roots are enslavement, and
Mm-hmm.
to know that my great great grandfather comes out of slavery and by somehow gets 160 acres of land.
Wow.
For me, it really diminishes any insecurity or lack of confidence that I come up against because I have that reference point to say, like, for example, I mean, my country just reelected Donald Trump. And so I'm
Mm-hmm.
sitting here thinking to myself, I mean, this is a guy whose track record is on full display. There are no surprises this time around.
Mm-mm.
And what is this going to be like for myself and for the kids
Mm-hmm.
who look like me, for my
Mm-hmm.
children who look like me in America?
Mm-hmm.
And it was easy to kind of fall into a bit of despair when the election results came down.
Mm-hmm.
Then I thought to myself, my people survived slavery. They survived Jim Crow, segregation, poll taxes, lynchings. We're going to make it. Like, we're
Mm-hmm.
not just going to make it, but we're going to continue to thrive. That's why my personal history, I never, there won't be anywhere that I travel on the planet where I am far removed from my personal history. What I'll also say is that for some people they may be thinking, well, I don't have that kind of story. I don't know that
Mm.
story in my family, or actually it's a
Mm.
negative.
Yep. Yep.
I think that's as instructive as well, right? It's
Mm.
also instructive to say, man, I don't want to be like my great great grandfather, right?
So it's your
Uh,
life purpose to change the pattern, right? To
e-
stop
e-
the intergenerational stuff like that. That could be amazing.
exactly. I think that step one is to acknowledge and learn and get as deeply embedded as you can into the history, and
Mm-hmm.
then to use it as a teaching tool.
Yeah. I was wondering as well about your wife and your children. You talk about them quite regularly, and I know you do some education sessions and so on and so forth. So you're very like integrated with them around financial literacy. And I was watching that on LinkedIn. I thought it was amazing. But really, I just wanted to talk to you about the times where you actually had to come back and go, you know what, I've been following my passion and my work to such an extent that it's actually had an effect on my family, and what conversations you've had with your wife around that, or has your wife ever pulled you up on it when, because you are by very nature, and I can obviously tell this, you are a very driven man,
Mm.
and that comes with some consequences, and you need, I would imagine, you probably accept and you probably would like to have someone pull you back every now
Yeah,
and then and just let you know
yeah,
you've
yeah,
gone too far. Is that the case?
yeah. No, pull you back and also push you forward. I think that
Yeah, sure, sure.
when you're in alignment with someone where they understand when your systems are overheating, they
Mm-hmm.
understand when you need breaks. They also understand when you need a kick in the ass. Um, and I think that that's a if you find someone like this in your life, I mean, this is the most important decision a person will make, because I think that that relationship can make or break your trajectory. And I'm not
Mm.
just talking professionally. And my wife, because and we're constantly sharing. I mean, everything's on full display. I mean, she knows what I'm thinking, what I'm questioning, where I'm headed, what I don't think I know. And she's always the one to say, "Hey, have you thought about this? Hey, probably it's time for a break. Hey, maybe it's time to get off of the break." Right? And she does it in a way where it's never. It kind of goes back to, Joe. We were talking about the feedback. It is never, and this is a true gift. It's never personal.
Mm.
It's about, hey, Darren, here are your values and here are your aspirations.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to overlay your current state, and I'm going to show you where the lines don't, where they don't overlap.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not to say you're lazy or you're too driven or No, it's like, hey, let's just keep. I think life is just a really. You're just making these. Hopefully, you're just making incremental movements, right? You're just tacking a little bit more to the left. Okay, stay on this course. Okay, tack a little bit to the right. Um, and to have someone to help you do it is pretty amazing. Yeah.
When was the time where you most felt like you just lost your way a little bit with the balance, and what did you do about it?
Yeah, it would have been my last year of coaching when I was sleeping at the office 3 nights a week. And
Wow.
I mean, look, I was a full time coach then, getting paid great money, working with the Cleveland Browns. And I just looked up and I realized this is a net loss for me. Like, I think I realized it when we won a football game, but the next day it felt to me like we lost because we're just on to the next one, right? It's like there's a lot of people talk about coaches talk about a 24-hour rule where
Mm-hmm.
regardless of whether you win or lose, you have 24 hours to either sulk or celebrate, and then you
Mm-hmm.
move on to the next one.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, man, I don't even have more than a day to feel good about a victory, a hard fought one.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, this isn't fulfilling me the way that it did 6 years before. And I think this is the thing, right? I think a lot of people know that, but we just say, oh well, right? It's this notion of sunk cost. Well, I've already put 7 years into coaching. I can't switch now. Like, why not? Like, I mean, it's not like there's someone. It's not like there's some referee like, oh, Daron, you know, you have to do 10 years before you can make a switch. Like, no one's keeping score. So,
Mm.
and the people who are the people in your circle and not corner. So, do what's right for you.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah.
So when it seems quite similar that you move from making a massive change from law and going into sort of coaching, but then the idea that you no longer want to be a coach seems like a similar emotional decision point, right?
Yeah.
Super difficult to make because of the success that you've had and the love of it, at least retrospectively, thinking back on it. So, it just seems like you've made a habit of getting to a point, making a strong decision, and just going with it. Would that be true?
Yeah. I mean, look, I'll also say, like, when I'm not really going into detail on is that I also, one of the most important things for me is optionality. And when I
Yep.
think about optionality, I instantly think of cash on hand. So I've become less conservative, but in my early years, I just stockpiled cash
Mm-hmm.
because I never want to be in a position where the W 2 or the monthly paycheck dictates my decision.
Mm-hmm.
So the more cash I have on hand, the more freedom I have to follow my gut.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think those work in tandem because I think that if you're if you're already living paycheck to paycheck, or if you've overinvested in lifestyle, these decisions become impossible, right?
So
Because
in
you
some
can't
way,
weather the transition phase.
you're saying prioritize your future self a little bit more,
Yeah,
in
yeah. I'm
terms of.
saying, like, I've always said, listen, for me throughout life, man, keep as much of your cash as you possibly can so that if you want to make a transition that will require some dip in income, you can do that comfortably.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not comfortably, but you can do it. I know
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people who hate their jobs but can't leave it because they've got 3 vacation homes.
Gotcha.
Um, they're living in a neighborhood that's really probably
Gotcha.
2 grades over what their balance sheet says it should be,
Mm-hmm.
and that to me is confining. I am a believer of optionality, which means for me it has to result in aggressive saving.
Makes sense. Makes sense. You did an exercise with us, which was quite profound for me anyway. Kind of scary, actually, to be honest. I'm 43 years of age. Um, could you perhaps talk to us about the exercise?
Yeah.
Because I thought about how many times I would see my family in Montreal again, and it was an interesting exercise.
I think that, imagine a strip of paper and it has from 1 until 77. So in the US, if you take the combined life expectancy, you look at the actuarial charts between men and women, it averages out to about 77. Well, if you take a slip of paper that's numbered from 1 to 77, and you put your finger on your current age, and you tear the piece of paper into two pieces, well, everything from 1 until your current age, sunk cost. Like, behind you, there's nothing you can do about it.
Mm-hmm.
You can learn from it. You can leverage it for the future in terms of lessons. Can't change it. Everything from that point forward, from your age until 77, is a gift. Now, here's the thing. I'm 45. And so I also understand that I'm one stroke, one brain aneurysm, one ACL tear on the basketball court from drastically changing the quality of that slip of paper as well.
Mm-hmm.
This, for me, is a great reminder that I have to maximize the time that I think I have left. And the reason why I'm saying think is because, I'm at that age where I have some friends who've passed away unexpectedly, and everything that the annual checkups were all great, and all indicators, kind of trended towards them being healthy, but it didn't work out. So I do that exercise with myself actually once a month, and really just reflect and say, okay, man, like every day, it sounds so cheesy, but every day is a true gift. This hit me hard the day after the election. Like, I wanted to really spend a lot of time soaking. And I said, man, these seconds matter, and the way that I spend them matters. Let me be as intentional as I possibly can with them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, on that idea of auditing how long you have left and making sure that you're intentional with your time, going forward, what excites you? What's your last project? What's like, if there was a choice in having your last project before the end of your life, what would that project be?
Yeah. Man, Joe, nothing lights me up more than writing. The twin crafts for me are speaking and writing, and the overlap between the two really is language. I just love, I love language. I think about the arrangement of words. I think about the sound. And it's an infinite field, right? So, for me, it would be, I'm working on a novel. It's the first piece of serious fiction that I've written. It's scary as hell. Don't know what I'm doing. But every day the micro win is to write 500 words. And I get up and do it. And some days I think I'm Shakespeare, and some days I think I'm a third grade teacher, a third grade student. Right? It's like, and that's I think, Joe, I think this is you're making me think of a point that I think is important, which is I'm always afraid when things are really easy. Like, if I can go throughout the week in a craft and like just nail every day, every decision, if I'm not wringing my hands a little bit in my craft, I'm in the wrong craft. And I can tell you this, if I wrote 1,000,000 words a day until the day I died, I would still die thinking that I am an average writer. And I think that that's, that's not debilitating to me. That's actually empowering to know that there's that much room for growth in the craft that I've chosen.
And, to quote a poor 80s movie, I think No Pain, No Gain, I'm sure there was a movie, something like that. But, the idea that like, gain comes with some form of a cost, right? Usually if you're feeling no cost, if you're feeling no risk, if you're not feeling sweaty in the palms, like, every morning, that I get up and do this podcast, it doesn't matter, with who, I'm always that little birdie on my shoulder saying, are you going to stuff this one up? What are you going to do? But that tells me that I'm invested and I'm excited and I'm enjoying it. So really, there is a link, don't you think, between sort of something that makes you feel nervous, kind of maybe stresses you out a little bit, but you know that it's adaptive, you know that it's good.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a neurological. There's a basis for this from a neurological standpoint because when you're creating new brain synapses, right, new pathways,
Mm-hmm.
there is a level of satisfaction that the brain gets from, oh man, we're doing this new thing. I got this much better. Like, I'll give you an example, Joe. Last week I worked on a paragraph for 2 days, one paragraph. And I would write something, I'd go to bed, I'd get up and look at it, and I'm like, shh, and I'd change a few words, come back. And by the end of the week, I'm like, man, I think this is about as good as I can take it right now.
Mm-hmm.
Without an editor coming in or a coach, a writing coach. Like, I really think that I have extracted as much of my potential to make this a great paragraph according to my standards as I possibly can. And there's no better feeling than that. And I think the brain rewards you because you say, man, um, it's really not supposed to be easy. I remember, one of our famous all-time great baseball players, Willie Mays. I mean, Hall of Famer. He passed away earlier in the year. But I remember watching an interview with him, and he talked about like at the end of his career, he was still nervous when he got into the batter's box. And you're like, this guy's got 660 home runs and one of the highest batting averages of all time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He's still approaching the batter's box with a little bit of anxiety, like what's the next pitch going to be, right? And I think that's where I want to live. I want to live in that state.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So tell me, in terms of, again, coming back to your great grandfather and his impact on you. And I mean, I don't know, objectively, just looking in and listening to what you say, like a lot of the decision making you've made is have been tough choices. And I imagine like his story really, would have sat there in, given that you're a deep thinker and you would have thought about the history, would have really aided you in being able to make these kind of really strong choices. And maybe it has some, I don't know if he's your dad, on your dad's line, but maybe it has some way into your dad actually being able to see that your choices are in line with that sort of heritage as well. But I just wondered, like going forward, how would you like to be remembered? Because you'll be potentially, maybe, a great grandfather one day.
Yeah, I think it was also interesting though. I think it's a good point because I've read something that said that every 100 years the Earth gets an entirely new group of people, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
like you just wipe the slate clean. There's 100,
Yeah.
So I think, I wonder. I mean, my grandkids. Hopefully, if I'm fortunate enough to survive that long, they'll have some memory of me. My great great grands, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I hope to the point that there is some residue from Daron Kurt Roberts um, moving forward into posterity for me. I hope I'm remembered as someone of high character and an extreme willingness to take chances. And obviously, I never met my great grandfather Bill Roberts, but I can tell from what he was able to amass, given his circumstances, this guy was putting it all on the line. And I would hope to be remembered in a similar way.
Amazing. Just on a final kind of, as we head to the end, I did obviously come up to you and shook your hand and had a conversation with you at the conference. And like I said, I was very compelled to talk to you, but also to have you on the podcast, and you were incredibly amazing about it too, because I know you're a busy man. But I wondered when I came up to you and I talked to you about the podcast, and I said to you the name of it is "It's Never About Money." What comes to mind when that was mentioned?
Mm. When I hear the term "it's never about money," instantly what goes to my mind is, oftentimes people find themselves at this. They're walking out on a limb of the decision tree, and the older I get, the more I try to get in tune with my belly. I feel like we spend a lot of time on our brains and our knowledge. The older I get, the more I'm certain of the fact that my gut requires more attention from me,
Mm,
because I think that it is as powerful of a tool in terms of decision making as my brain. And so I think about it's never about money. Oftentimes people are on this limb of their decision tree and they opt for the status quo because for them it's about the money. They either say, man, if I start now, it's going to take me so long to make the kind of revenue or income that I'm making in my current job, so let me stay. And
mm,
I don't have a bias towards just switching careers, but I just know a lot of dissatisfied people. Or they say, you know what? I'm just going to put my head down and keep doing the thing in the status quo. And then when I'm 75 or 69 or
mm,
65,
mm,
I'm going to take the money and live my life. And man, we all know that the quality of life, you know, quality of life and age are inverted variables,
mm. Yeah, it's
right?
like I don't know whether I'm right in this, Darren, but like you've distilled very nicely what I've felt is the difference between just resilience and strategic perseverance. The idea
Mm,
that resilience you can be resilient to something that is completely damaging to you and your soul, and you've described it perfectly. The strategic perseverance is really about like, what's the path of sort of not least resistance is not what I'm trying to say, but the path that makes our sort of soul sing, and then use that resilience in that area.
yes, yes,
You
yes.
know,
Yeah. Whew. My dad always asked, "What game are you playing?"
yep.
Right? What game are you playing?
Mm.
And it used to bother me as when I was little. I was like, what's he talking about? But then I realized like there are
Yeah.
games within games, right? And so the more you can really be honest with yourself, like, hey, Daron, what game am I playing now?
Mm.
Because the game that you're playing, you could score, 100 on the resilience chart in a game that you hate, or a
Mm.
game that is um, net negative for your life, and you can be just resilient as hell, right?
How many
But
athletes have you seen? How many athletes have you seen that were incredibly talented, resilient, but hated what they were doing?
I listen. I had a player. I had an offensive lineman. I didn't coach offensive lineman, but he was on a team that I coached for. And he and I were just talking. We're walking off the practice field, and this guy's 6'5", 330 pounds. And I said something like, "We had a good day at practice," and I said something like, "Man, you got to love this game." And he said, "I actually hate it." And we were just the two of us. We were kind of at the very back. He's like, "I actually hate it." And I'm like, first of all, no one says that.
Out
This is a
loud.
player to coach. And I was like, what? He said, man, I've just been big all my life. So everyone's like, oh, you could be an NFL offensive lineman. And so I just kind of did it. And he was good at it. It didn't light him up. I talk about this in the book, like constantly asking yourself, like, what lights me up? But the
Mm,
switching costs for him mentally, the switching costs from going from an offensive NFL lineman to insert whatever he would choose were so stark and would be so negative to the people around him that he was going to ride it out.
Mm.
And so I just think, Joe, you're really making me think about this. That question, like for people in your audience and your listeners, like really asking yourself, what game am I playing? And I think that to really get to the truth, I try to ask the same question at least 3 times, because
Mm.
the brain will first throw sort of this like surface level response.
Mm.
And then you say, but what game is within that game? And then
Mm.
you answer that question. Well, what game is within that game? And then starting around that third, fourth level, you really get to the, ooh, like this, this isn't an offensive lineman game. This is a social validation game I'm playing. And if
Mm.
it's that game,
Find something else.
find something else. Find something else.
Mm.
And look, I do want to say this point because I think I've had to I just want people who are listening to this to understand that by no means am I making this out to be like, I haven't figured this stuff out. I'm still
Mm.
learning. I
Mm.
know it's extremely difficult.
Mm. Mm.
And I don't want to come off as like Pollyannish and like, hey, just, reach for the stars and live your best life. Man, there's a
No.
lot of Excel balance sheet questions, family questions that you have to sort through. But man, if you've got the right people around you and you do the internal work and share that with them and with yourself, I think you'd be surprised at what you're capable of.
Mm. Mm. I've got no sense of theatre. I think that would have been a perfect place to end, but I just needed to ask you. We're getting to the end, I promise.
No, yeah.
I'm fascinated, but we've talked about micro wins. You've got a kid's book on empathy. I just wanted you to sort of share with our guests, like what you've got available that might be
Yeah,
interesting for them to read, and how they can, stay in touch and
absolutely.
that sort of thing.
No, first, thanks for just having me. It's an honor. I always you forced me to think through. I'm actually going to journal after I get off of the call because you forced me to think through some things and kind of help to refine some of my ideas. 3 books I've written. The first one was Calling Audible, and this is just my journey. It starts with my last year at Harvard Law School, and it goes all the way through the first contract that I signed with the Kansas City Chiefs. And at the end of each chapter, I have a set of pivot points, and these are 3 to 4 sort of coachable strategies that you can use if you're looking to make a pivot. And I extrapolate beyond the world of coaching, and these are generalized points. So that's the first one. Second book is a kid's book about empathy. How do we feel with someone instead of for someone, which would be sympathy? Like, what does that look like from a step-by-step process? And it says a kid's book about empathy, but given the fact that adults are very bad at it, I think the audience is larger than the young folks. And then my last book, Micro Wins. For me, micro wins, which is my daily system of picking a small victory in work, family, and health that leads into what I call my macro wins, my big goals. It's a book that helps you to institute a system in your life for tackling big goals. And I
Even in
try
your
to be, I
business.
think you can, yeah. No, I think I try to be, it's not it's more of the Microsoft Excel side of me than the Word, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's probably, I'd say maybe a 30-70 split. Like there's 30% the Word kind of
Yep.
creative, imaginative space, and then 70% is just the mechanics.
I need
And
more Excel in my life. So
I think we all do. And I mean, look, I was thinking about this. I've been to all 7 continents. My best friend and I took a trip to Australia in 2005. Uh, Went scuba diving, Great Barrier
awesome.
Reef,
Yeah,
uh,
amazing.
Sydney and Perth. Some great times there in the country and on the continent. So, look, man, find an excuse for us to let's have an event. Let's do something there.
Yeah,
I'd love to.
absolutely.
Serious, man.
I, I love it. I'd love you to come down and I'll take you to an AFL match.
Yes.
I don't know if you've ever done that in Melbourne, but an AFL match is an amazing experience. Pretty amazing
I
crowds.
haven't.
Sometimes
Listen,
we get like 90, 100,000. It's huge.
yes, I haven't. I mean, this past year I had a chance I spoke in Osaka and
Yeah,
Mauritius and Dublin. So, and took my family, we're always, world travel is important for us. So, man, maybe we can do this. Let's have a live viewing and go to a game
live
and,
viewing, live podcast. That would be amazing.
yes, make a party of it.
Great idea. Now, I can't let you go before one last question. It's a short question, but it's a difficult question. I always ask my guests at the end, what would be your spirit animal and why? What would embody you from an animal point of view?
Yeah. The wolf.
The wolf.
The wolf. And I think this is probably an animal that I've embraced more at this kind of midpoint in my life, hopefully. Because when I think about the wolf is a strategic hunter.
Mm.
Most of its time is spent watching, waiting,
Yep.
smelling, like taking in the environment, and then becomes very strategic when it's time to pounce, right? And I think that I probably spent most of my life as like the rabbit, where I was just running around, chasing myself, kind of in this hustle-nista mode. And now I found one, I've really embraced recovery and rest.
Mhm.
And then also, when it's time for me to go into go mode, to fully dive into that mode. And so, hands down, Joe, it would be the wolf.
Oh, it's an amazing answer because I've never had a guest. I think we're up to maybe 60 plus episodes. I've never had a guest who's actually explained that they were previously a certain animal and then they've changed to another animal. It's completely in line with what I perceive to be your reflective nature. It's amazing. Look, I got to say, this has been a blast. I've learnt a lot. And I told you at the start that the idea for me is that when I see someone that I'm curious about and I feel like I can learn from, that is a telltale sign that they have to be, if I can, on my podcast because I'm going to prepare for it. I'm going to learn, and selfishly, I'm going to have an upgrade in my own software. So,
Listen,
from my perspective, thank you.
I just have to tell your guests. I mean, I've never been pitched harder. I've never, I've never said yes on the spot. I am a classic because my typical system is just like, give me some time to think about it because I've made a lot of bad decisions in my life where I've been impulsively a yes person. Mm-hmm. But man, your spirit, your energy, the questions, the conversation, like I knew this was the right thing to do. And look, for folks who want to like stay in touch, I live on LinkedIn. I think it's the last sane social media platform. So I'm just Daron K. Roberts on LinkedIn.
Me too.
Coach DKR on Instagram. I'm there as well. And then coachdkr.com. If I can ever add value, to any of your listeners as a speaker or coach or what have you, feel free to reach out. But man, this has been a blast.
Awesome, Daron. We'll be in touch and looking forward to dropping this one because it's a cracker. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you so much. I can't wait to share it with my tribe as well. So thanks for having me on, man.
Awesome.
If you have resonated in any way with the sentiments of this podcast, we would be delighted to direct you to our website, www.itsneveraboutmoney.com.au, for more free resources and education aimed at improving your capacity to make sound financial decisions for the benefit of your family. We wish you every success, however you define it.